The colorful gift bag sat on the kitchen counter, looking perfectly innocent under the warm yellow lights of our home. My parents, Vivian and Calvin, had arrived earlier that evening with wide smiles and a large sealed learning kit for my 6-year-old son Leo. They called it a special surprise to help him get ahead in school. At first, it seemed like a wonderful gesture, but something felt off. My husband, Marcus, noticed my hesitation and rolled his eyes, whispering that I was being dramatic again. He always thought I looked for problems where none existed, especially when it came to his parents. I tried to ignore the knot in my stomach as Leo hugged them. His small face lit up with excitement. After everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally still, I sat alone in the dark kitchen with the box. It was a sturdy, professional-looking kit, but as I ran my fingers along the edges, I noticed a tiny detail. The clear factory tape on the side was slightly wrinkled, and there was a faint trace of glue where there shouldn't have been any. It looked like someone had opened it very carefully and then resealed it to make it look brand new. My parents' rehearsed smiles from earlier flashed in my mind. My heart started to race because I realized the box had been opened and badly resealed. My breath caught in my throat as I grabbed a small kitchen knife to slice through the tape. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. When I opened the lid, everything looked normal at first. Brightly colored blocks, cards, and plastic tools. However, there was a heavy base at the bottom of the box that felt much denser than it should. I flipped the kit over and found a small, hidden compartment tucked behind a false plastic panel. My hands shook as I pried it open with the tip of the knife. Inside, wrapped in a strange, thick foil, was an item that no child's toy should ever contain. It wasn't a toy at all. It was a heavy, metallic cylinder with a digital display that was turned off. It looked industrial and cold, completely out of place among the primary colors of the learning blocks. I knew immediately that this wasn't a mistake or a factory error. Someone had put this here on purpose. My skin crawled as I thought about Leo playing with this just hours ago. I took a shaky photo and texted it to my mother, Vivian. I asked her what on earth was inside the gift. A few minutes later, her reply popped up on my screen, sending a chill down my spine. "It's harmless if you don't overreact, dear. Just put it back." I stood in the kitchen, staring at my phone when I heard footsteps behind me. It was Marcus, looking tired and annoyed. I showed him the metallic cylinder and the foil wrapping, expecting him to be as shocked as I was. Instead, he let out a frustrated sigh and shook his head. He accused me of projecting my old issues with his parents onto a simple gift. He said I was always looking for reasons to hate them and that I was making a mountain out of a molehill. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There was a strange device hidden in our son's toy, and he was blaming me. Then the phone rang. It was Vivian. Her voice was light and airy, almost as if she were talking about the weather. She laughed off my concerns and told me I was being unstable and overly emotional. She said it was just a specialized battery for the electronic parts of the kit and that I was embarrassing myself by making a scene. She told me to put it back in the box and forget it ever happened. Marcus nodded along as he listened to her on speakerphone, looking at me with pity. I felt like I was losing my mind, but I knew what I saw. I waited until Marcus went back to bed, and then I silently photographed every single inch of that box. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my small home office with the door locked, my laptop glowing in the dark. I started researching the serial numbers and the symbols I had seen on the metallic cylinder. What I found made the blood drain from my face. It wasn't a battery. The item was a highly regulated industrial component, the kind used in large-scale manufacturing that was strictly controlled by the government. In fact, it was illegal for a private citizen to own one without a specific license. My parents hadn't just given Leo a strange gift. They had brought something dangerous into our home. The next morning, Leo woke up complaining of a strange, itchy rash on his arms. He had spent the previous evening handling the blocks that had been sitting right on top of that foil-wrapped cylinder. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked at the red bumps on his skin. I called Vivian again, my voice trembling with fear. She didn't sound worried at all. She told me it was probably just the new soap I was using and told me to stop being so dramatic. I looked at the box sitting on the counter, and I knew I couldn't let it stay there. I decided to hide the box in the back of my closet where no one could find it. Later that day, while Marcus was out running errands, I took the box out again. I felt like a detective in a movie, but the stakes were my son's life. I started checking the packaging even more closely, peeling back the inner lining of the cardboard. That's when I found it. A second concealed compartment hidden in the very structure of the box. My fingers fumbled as I pulled out a stack of folded papers. They weren't instructions for a child's game. They were covered in foreign labels, complex serial numbers, and technical diagrams that looked like blueprints for a much larger machine. I spread the papers out on the floor, my eyes darting across the text. Most of it was in a language I didn't recognize, but the numbers were clear. These were tracking logs and shipping manifests. As I looked closer at the bottom of the main document, I searched for my parents' names, Vivian or Calvin. I expected to see their names as the owners or the shippers, but they were nowhere to be found. The paperwork listed a company I had never heard of and a completely different set of names. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My parents weren't just the givers of this gift. They were moving something for someone else. The room felt like it was spinning. I knew I couldn't handle this on my own anymore. I grabbed my phone and searched for a consumer safety hotline, thinking they might be able to tell me what the device was without involving the police yet. When the operator picked up, I kept my voice low and explained that I had found a strange industrial component inside a toy. I described the metallic cylinder and the markings on the foil. The operator, who had been speaking in a bored tone, suddenly went completely silent. I asked if she was still there. "Ma'am," she said, her voice now sharp and professional. "Listen to me very carefully. Stop handling that item immediately. Do not touch the foil, and do not let your child near that room. We are flagging this as a high-priority safety violation." She told me to stay by my phone and expect a follow-up call from a specialized department. I hung up, my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst. Just as I set the phone down, the screen lit up again. It wasn't the hotline. It was an incoming call from a blocked number. I stared at the flashing screen, afraid to answer. I finally picked up the phone, but it wasn't the authorities. It was Vivian. The second I answered, she started screaming. She was absolutely furious, her voice high and shrill, a side of her I rarely saw. She demanded that I bring the box back to her house immediately. She said I had no right to go through her things and that I was ruining everything. I froze, my hand tightening on the phone. "How do you know I contacted anyone?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Vivian realized she had messed up. She stammered for a second, her confidence wavering. "I just know how you are," she snapped, but it was too late. She had slipped up. She then said something that made the world stop turning. "Marcus told me you were being difficult. He said you were asking too many questions." My stomach turned. My own husband was reporting my movements to his mother while I was worried about our son's safety. Vivian kept talking, her voice turning cold and threatening. She admitted that Marcus knew exactly what was happening and that I needed to play my part for the sake of the family. When Marcus walked through the front door an hour later, I was waiting for him in the living room. I didn't yell. I didn't even stand up. I just looked at him and asked him how long he had been lying to me. He tried to play it off at first, smiling and asking what I was talking about, but when he saw the papers spread out on the table, his face went white. He finally sat down and confessed. He said he helped his parents bring the gift through customs during their last trip to do them a favor. He claimed they told him it was just a way to avoid high taxes on expensive electronics. He swore he didn't know all the details, but as I asked more questions, his story kept changing. First, he said it was a one-time thing, then he admitted they had done it before. He said his parents were in some kind of financial trouble and this was their way out. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and begged me not to ruin the family by talking to the authorities. He said if I just stayed quiet, everything would go back to normal and we would be taken care of financially. I looked at him and realized I didn't recognize the man I had married. The next morning, the 48 hours truly began. I woke up to an official email from a government agency I had never dealt with before. It was a formal request for the item, the packaging, and all the photographs I had taken. The subject line included words that made my stomach drop. Potential federal safety and customs violations. They weren't playing around. They told me that an investigator would be in touch shortly and that I was to secure the evidence. I felt a strange mix of terror and relief. Finally, someone was taking this seriously. I spent the next few hours in a daze, watching Leo play in the backyard. I felt like a spy in my own life. Marcus was avoiding me, pacing in the kitchen and whispering into his phone. I knew he was talking to Vivian and Calvin, probably plotting a way to get the box back before the authorities arrived. I kept the box locked in my trunk, and the keys were in my pocket. The tension in the house was so thick I could taste it. Just as I was about to make a cup of coffee to calm my nerves, a loud, heavy knock echoed through the house. My heart leaped into my throat. I thought it was the investigators, but when I looked through the peephole, it was Marcus's father, Calvin. He didn't have his usual jovial expression. He looked grim and desperate. Marcus rushed to the door to let him in, but I stood in the way. Calvin didn't even say hello. He told me he was there to collect the mistake and take it off my hands. He said he had a friend who could fix the situation and that I didn't need to worry about the emails or the phone calls anymore. When I didn't move, Calvin changed his tactic. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. He set it on the table and slid it toward me. "There's $50,000 in there," he said quietly. "It's a gift for Leo's future. Just give me the box and we can all move on." Marcus looked at the money and then at me, his eyes pleading. He wanted me to take the deal. I felt a wave of disgust so strong I nearly gagged. I told Calvin to leave. When he tried to push past me, I shoved him back and locked the front door. The silence that followed was broken by the frantic chirping of my phone. It was a text from Vivian. I opened it, expecting more insults, but instead I saw an image that made my heart stop. It was a photo of old court documents from 10 years ago. Documents from a difficult time in my past that I had worked hard to move on from. Below the photo, Vivian wrote, "I will make sure everyone knows the truth about you if you don't cooperate. Think about what this will do to your reputation and your custody of Leo." I realized then that this was never just a gift or a small favor. It was leverage. They had been holding on to my past, waiting for a moment when they needed me to be silent. They were willing to destroy my life to protect their own secrets. I looked up and saw Leo standing in the hallway, clutching his favorite stuffed animal. He looked confused and scared by all the shouting and the locked doors. "Mommy," he asked softly, "why is Grandma angry with you? Did I do something wrong?" My heart broke into a million pieces. I took Leo to his room and told him everything was going to be okay, even though I didn't believe it myself. I sat on his bed and held him until he calmed down. While I was there, my phone started exploding with messages from the family group chat. My cousins, aunts, and in-laws were all posting in a panic. I checked my neighbor's security camera feed, which I could see on my phone. 2 unmarked black vehicles had just pulled up to my parents-in-law's house down the street. Men in jackets with official emblems were stepping out. Marcus saw the messages at the same time I did. He turned pale, his skin taking on a sickly gray tint. He slumped against the wall, the realization finally hitting him that his parents weren't as untouchable as he thought. The authorities I had contacted weren't just checking for a toy defect. They were conducting a full-scale investigation. The group chat was a mess of "what is happening?" and "are Calvin and Vivian okay?" I didn't reply to any of them. I just watched the screen as the investigators began to lead my father-in-law toward one of the cars. Few minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was a direct call from an investigator named Agent Miller. He told me that they had intercepted communication between my parents-in-law and a known smuggling ring. The item in the learning kit was a specialized component used in illegal high-tech manufacturing, and it had been flagged in multiple cases across the country. My parents-in-law weren't just doing a favor. They were active participants in a distribution chain. They were not first-time offenders, and they had been under the radar for months. Agent Miller's voice was calm but very serious. He told me that they had enough evidence to move forward, but they needed my formal statement to tie everything together. Then he said something that made me look over at Marcus. "We've also been reviewing your husband's involvement," he said. "Based on the messages we've intercepted, we are trying to determine if he is a cooperating witness or a primary suspect." I looked at Marcus, who was shaking his head and crying silently. He had traded his family's safety for his parents' approval, and now he was facing the consequences. I spent the next hour on the phone with Agent Miller, giving a full, detailed statement. I told him about the box, the hidden compartments, the rash on Leo's arm, and the threats from Vivian. I told him about the money Calvin had tried to give me and the photo of the court documents. Every time I spoke a sentence, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. Marcus kept begging me to stop talking. He kept saying, "You're making it worse, you're going to put them in jail." I ignored him. I realized in that moment that silence was exactly what they were counting on. They thought they could buy me, scare me, or guilt-trip me into protecting them. They didn't care that they had put their own grandson at risk. I looked at Marcus and realized that our marriage was over. He had chosen his parents over our son, and he would have let Leo get hurt just to keep the peace. I didn't say another word to him. I walked into our bedroom, grabbed a large suitcase, and started packing a bag for me and Leo. While I was packing, I saw a notification that Vivian had posted something on Facebook. It was a long, dramatic rant about ungrateful daughters-in-law, who try to tear families apart. She didn't name me, but everyone knew who she was talking about. She claimed she had only ever tried to help us and that I was mentally unstable and seeking attention. She tried to paint herself as a victim of a cruel plot. I watched as the comments started rolling in, mostly from family friends who were shocked. However, the narrative didn't stay in her favor for long. Some of the commenters were neighbors who had seen the unmarked cars at her house. They started connecting the dots. Someone even mentioned seeing government agents carrying boxes out of their garage. The more Vivian tried to defend herself online, the more people started to question what was really going on. Then someone, I don't know who, leaked a photo of the official paperwork that had been served to them. The internet turned on her instantly, and her public meltdown only made her look more guilty. The next day, I met with Agent Miller in person at a secure office. He explained the bigger scheme to me. The gift was part of a much larger distribution chain that used children's products to smuggle high-value industrial parts across borders. It was a brilliant and disgusting plan. Smugglers assumed that customs officials wouldn't tear apart a learning kit for a child. My child was being used as a test case, because my parents-in-law were the perfect cover. They were grandparents, respected in their community, and I was expected to stay quiet. They chose you because they thought you were the weak link, Miller said, looking me in the eye. They thought because of your past and your marriage to Marcus, you would never speak up. You weren't supposed to notice the tape, the weight, or the hidden panels. I sat there in shock, realizing how much they had underestimated me. They didn't see me as a mother protecting her child. They saw me as a convenient tool. The fact that Leo had handled those materials didn't matter to them as long as the package was delivered. As the investigation continued, I learned the most painful truth of all. Marcus hadn't just helped his parents during a trip. He had been paid months earlier to facilitate the whole thing. He had accepted a large sum of money into a secret bank account to ensure the gifts made it into our home and then to their final destination. He had chosen money over the safety of his own son. He assumed that I would just fall in line like I always did, following his lead and trusting his parents without question. When I confronted him with this information, he didn't even try to deny it anymore. He just sat on the floor of our empty living room and stared at the wall. It was supposed to be easy money, he whispered. I didn't think anyone would get hurt. I didn't care about his excuses. That same afternoon, I called my lawyer and filed for an emergency separation and a restraining order. I couldn't be near a man who would gamble with our child's life. I took Leo and moved into a small, safe apartment across town. The consequences for Vivian and Calvin became very real, very fast. Their large, beautiful home was searched top to bottom for 3 days straight. Investigators found a small workshop in their basement where they had been resealing boxes for months. All of their bank accounts and assets were frozen as part of the federal investigation. Suddenly, all those family friends who had supported Vivian's Facebook rant couldn't be reached. They didn't want to be anywhere near a smuggling investigation. I was sitting in my new kitchen when I checked my voicemail and saw a message from Vivian. Her voice wasn't high and angry anymore. She was crying, sounding small and terrified. She kept saying they never meant for things to go this far, and begged me to tell the investigators that it was all a big misunderstanding. She sounded like a completely different person, stripped of the power and influence she had used to bully me for years. I listened to the whole message once and then deleted it. I felt nothing but a cold sense of justice. For the first time in my life I felt the power shift. For years, Vivian had controlled every holiday, every birthday, and even how I raised my son. She had used her money and her status to keep me under her thumb. Now she was the one who was afraid. She sent me one last text asking what I wanted from her. She offered to give me anything if I would just change my statement or stop cooperating with Agent Miller. She was desperate to save herself. I typed out a short reply and hit send. I want nothing from you ever again. Not your money, not your gifts, and especially not your presence in my son's life. I watched the red receipt appear, and then the 3 dots showed she was typing. Then they disappeared. She didn't reply. She finally realized that her leverage was gone. I had already told the truth, and no amount of money or threats could take it back. I blocked her number and felt a strange, peaceful silence fill my heart. The legal fallout was massive. A few weeks later, the formal charges were announced publicly by the local news. The headlines all echoed the same shocking phrase: industrial components disguised as children's gifts. The story went viral, and people were horrified that a family would use a child's toy for such a dangerous crime. I saw photos of Vivian and Calvin walking into court, their heads bowed to hide from the cameras. They looked old and broken, a far cry from the powerful people they used to be. Then Marcus's lawyer called me. He tried to sound professional, but I could hear the stress in his voice. He wanted to know if I was willing to discuss a plea deal for Marcus. He argued that Marcus was under the influence of his parents and shouldn't face the same level of punishment. I told the lawyer that I wasn't the one he needed to convince. He needed to talk to the federal prosecutors. I told him I wouldn't be helping Marcus in any way. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. Despite everything, they tried one last time to make a deal. Marcus's legal team offered me a massive settlement if I would retract my statements about his knowledge of the payments. They promised me enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. For a split second, I thought about how much easier things would be with that money. But then I looked at Leo, who was finally starting to act like a normal kid again. his rash gone and his smile returning. I told them no. I told them I was done being managed, minimized, and threatened. I was done being the unstable daughter-in-law they could manipulate. I had my dignity, and I had my son's safety, and those things weren't for sale. The lawyer hung up, and I knew the case would move forward without their settlement. It was a scary path to take, but it was the only one that allowed me to look at myself in the mirror every morning. A few months later, Leo asked me why we had moved away from our old house and why we didn't see Daddy or Grandma anymore. I sat him down and used gentle words to explain. I told him that sometimes people make very bad choices that can hurt others, even if they don't mean to. I told him that Mommy noticed something felt wrong with the gift, and I had to listen to that feeling to keep him safe. I didn't tell him the dark details, but I didn't lie to him either. He listened quietly, his big eyes watching my face. After I finished, he didn't cry or ask more questions. He just reached out and gave me a big hug, burying his face in my shoulder. "Good," he whispered. "I like our new home better. It's quiet here." That was all I needed to hear. All the stress, the court dates, and the threats were worth it for that one word. He felt safe, and for a mother, there is no greater victory than that. As the trial drew closer, the online narrative shifted completely. People began to see the manipulation Vivian had used in her earlier posts. Someone even started a social media thread analyzing her public rants and comparing them to the evidence being released by the court. Her own words were being used against her to show her character and her willingness to lie. It was a strange kind of public vindication that I never expected. The community that had once looked up to them was now watching their downfall with fascination. The sentencing dates were finally scheduled. Vivian and Calvin were facing significant time in federal prison, and Marcus was looking at a shorter but still serious sentence for his role in the money laundering side of the operation. The high-powered life they had built on secrets and smuggling was finally over. I didn't feel happy about it, but I felt a deep sense of closure. The world was finally seeing them for who they really were, and I didn't have to carry their secrets anymore. The family that once controlled everything in my life was suddenly quiet. No more calls, no more texts, and no more threats. The only things that arrived in the mail were legal notices and updates from my lawyer. The silence was beautiful. For years, I had lived in a state of constant anxiety, trying to please people who were never going to be satisfied. Now I could breathe. I could walk through my front door and know that I was the one in charge of my life and my son's future. I started a new job, a small position in a local library that paid enough to keep us comfortable. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. I spent my afternoons with Leo, helping him with his real schoolwork and watching him grow. The learning kit was gone, but the lesson I learned from it would stay with me forever. I learned that my instincts were right and that I was stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. I had protected my son from a danger that was hidden right in plain sight. Looking back, I realized that I didn't need to scream or fight to win. I didn't need to destroy anyone with my own hands. I simply told the truth and refused to protect people who were willing to endanger my child for their own greed. By standing my ground, I forced the world to see the reality of the situation. My parents-in-law face the consequences of their crimes, my husband is gone from our lives, and my son is safe and happy in a home filled with love. The gift they gave Leo looked normal. It was shiny, colorful, and promised a bright future. But beneath the surface, it was hollow and dangerous. My response to that gift wasn't normal by their standards. I didn't stay quiet, I didn't take the bribe, and I didn't let them gaslight me into submission. I chose to be the mother my son deserved, and that is why everything worked out in the end. The truth can be a terrifying thing, but it is the only thing that can truly set you free. The gift looked normal. My response wasn't. And that's why it worked.